My stepsister, let's call her Amanda, 26F, showed up at my wedding last week uninvited, with some random kid whom I'd never seen before. My stepsister and I, 27F, haven't ever gotten along and we stopped speaking to each other as soon as both of us moved out for college. My mother married her father when we were in middle school and ever since then, she's been a total pain. My father divorced my mother when I was really little and hasn't been a part of our life ever. It wasn't the same for her, though. Her parents got divorced just a couple of years before my stepdad met my mom. And she was one of those annoying kids who believed that my mother was getting in the way of her parents' relationship, even though it was already over and had been for a long time before my mother even met her dad. She didn't like my mother but she hated me. And made it a point to be as nasty to me as she could be. Our parents tried to make us get along for a while but then they gave up when they realized that there was no way that Amanda was going to be nice to me. She always used to get on my nerves growing up and when I moved out for college, I was mostly just relieved that I wouldn't have to live in the same house as her anymore. We'd obviously meet each other during the holidays or on birthdays but we avoided talking to each other whenever we did and it was okay that way. About a year ago, there was an incident when my mother called me to ask me if I'd be okay with her using some leftover money from my college fund. I landed a scholarship so I didn't have to spend all the money in my college fund, and a little from my wedding fund to contribute to Amanda's wedding. At the time, I didn't even know that Amanda was getting married, that she was engaged, or even that she had a boyfriend. We hadn't been on talking terms for a really long time so I said no because I knew that that money could come in handy for me at some point. My mother didn't push it either, she just asked me that question, and when I said no, she said that that's all that she needed to know and then disconnected the call and we didn't talk about it afterward because I forgot about it. I didn't find out until recently that Amanda had to call off her wedding because her father had put his foot down and said that he wasn't going to pay for the fancy and extravagant wedding that she had in mind. And she'd expected our parents to pay for all of it, right from the venue to her wedding dress. He did have a certain amount of money set aside but her demands were way out of his budget. All the choices that she'd made were quite expensive and the wedding budget was ridiculous and would eat away at his savings as well, so her father said no and so she requested my mother to contribute as well, since her own mother had said that she had no money so she couldn't. My mother had a certain amount of money set aside for my wedding but she didn't want to use that without asking me first and making sure that it was okay with me. And when I told her that it wasn't, she refused to contribute as well. And Amanda and her fiancé, or his family, couldn't afford that wedding on their own so they ended up calling it off. Another reason that my stepdad and also my mother had said no to paying for the wedding was because Amanda and her fiancé had been together for less than a year before they got engaged and he knew that this marriage wasn't going to last, which is why he didn't want to spend a bombshell on an unnecessarily fancy wedding when he wasn't even sure about the groom. And he'd made the right call because a few months after their engagement, her fiancé ended up leaving her over some petty fight. She was very upset with our parents for quite some time after that because she believed that had they paid for the wedding and she and her fiancé were married he wouldn't have left the way he did. She didn't stop talking to them because she's still pretty financially dependent on them but she made it clear that she was very upset with him. Then, a couple of months ago, I got engaged to my boyfriend of almost 6 years. I talked to my parents about it and they offered to pay for the wedding but he and I wanted a simple, small, and intimate ceremony without much of a fuss and said we'd rather use that money for the future. My mother transferred all the money from my wedding fund to me and also the money that's been left over from my college fund. And even my stepdad sent me around $10,000. They told us that we were free to use the money however we placed and they wouldn't mind even if we had a large-scale wedding but my husband and I had our mind set on a small wedding. I made the mistake of making a Facebook post a few weeks ago, where I thanked everybody who was a part of the wedding in any capacity. Of course, I thanked my parents for all their support, both financial and emotional, and I mentioned both my parents, my mother, and my stepfather. Because in my head, they were my parents and have been ever since middle school. I don't consider Amanda my sister but I do consider my stepdad as my dad. It was an emotional post and a lot of people commented on it, which is how I think it showed up on Amanda's feed as well. She saw that post and presumably got mad because she realized that both our parents were helping me out with the wedding but refused to do the same for her in the past. She didn't do anything at the time and we only found out exactly how pissed off she was on the day of my wedding, unfortunately. She showed up at my wedding after the ceremony was over, thankfully, and we were just about to serve lunch. She walked into the venue with some random kid, who I later found out was her neighbor's son, came right up to me and started screaming at me, accusing me of stealing her dream wedding. She screamed at me and said that she hoped that I was happy now since I'd stolen not just her wedding but also her dad who now preferred me over her. My husband was standing right beside me and I was talking to a couple of my cousins when she started yelling at me and soon enough, everybody was looking at us. My parents came to the rescue and told her to go away before they called the cops, so she decided that she was going to drop a bomb before she left and she looked at my husband and told him that she'd been keeping a secret, for my sake, for a really long time now but she couldn't anymore. And then, she pushed the child forward and said that this child was apparently my son with my ex and I'd given him up for adoption years ago. Now my husband and I knew that it was not true, and my parents knew that it was not true, but the rest of the guests seemed to be a little scandalized when she said that. So my parents actually had to kick her out while my husband and I explained that Amanda was just crazy and jealous and that she was coming up with lies to defame me. After we managed to pacify the guests, we got to lunch and cranked up the tunes so people would forget about this stupid incident. Once my husband and I got home, we sat down with my parents and his parents, and my parents explained everything that's happened in the past so we'd have context as to why Amanda was so furious. I thought that it was ridiculously childish of her to make such a big deal out of this, especially since I believe that my parents had valid and legitimate reasons not to want to pay for her wedding. First off, it was extremely expensive compared to mine. At least my husband and I had contributed to our own wedding and didn't expect our parents to cover all the expenses. Then secondly, she hadn't even known her ex-fiancé for that long while my husband and I've been together for a really long time. So my parents knew that it was serious with us. And, forgive me for being blunt, they knew that paying for our wedding wouldn't be a waste. So I don't think that it's fair for her to compare my wedding with the one that she had in mind. My parents apologized for it, especially my stepdad, who was pretty embarrassed by what Amanda had done. We didn't blame them anyway because they weren't in control of the situation, and after we discussed it, everybody went home and that was it. But the next day, I received a call from my mother where she told me that Amanda had apparently picked up the kid from her neighbor's house without even informing her and was now being charged with kidnapping. Amanda had called them in the morning to inform them about this and ask her dad for help with money to bail her out and to find a lawyer. It was ridiculous to me that she would go to such an extent, just to humiliate me at my wedding, because this was all a bit excessive. I did feel a little sorry for her, but I didn't think I owed her any apology. However, ever since she got arrested, her friends have been rallying for her and accusing me of being the bad guy. They seem to think that I'm the one to blame for all this because apparently, they believe that my parents have always favored me and say that I'd always been the golden child. I always felt like our parents have treated us equally and have never favored one over the other. Both of us have always had equal opportunities, and I think it's a matter of who was able to make the most of what they had, so the accusation of me being the golden child seems kind of unfair. We went to the same school, and after that, I really think I got a scholarship because I was a better student, which is why I had leftover money from my college fund, so my parents had nothing to do with that. And I've been with my husband for a longer time than she was with her boyfriend, which is also not something that our parents could control. My stepdad has made it very clear to all of us that he would have definitely paid for his daughter's wedding, but she was being unreasonable at the time and was making insane demands that nobody in their right mind would agree to, which is why he backed out entirely. If she really wanted a wedding that badly, then she should have scaled down considerably. Or at least offered to cover some of the expenses herself, along with her fiancé and his family, but she didn't do any of that and just stuck to her ridiculous demands, expecting our parents to do everything for her. The budget was crazy, and so was the fact that she was rushing to marry a guy who she hadn't even known for a year. And that's why our parents weren't on board with the idea of throwing away an exorbitant amount of money on her wedding, that's all. I don't think it's fair for anybody to blame me for her predicament right now, but yet, her friends are. Initially, I thought that I wouldn't let it get to me, but it's been a week and I still feel kind of guilty about everything. As far as I know, she's in a lot of trouble legally, and even though everybody's mad at her, my stepdad is trying his best to come to a settlement with the mother of the child whom she brought with her that day. My husband doesn't think that I have anything to feel sorry for, but I just do. I feel guilty. Ida for taking money from my stepdad for my wedding and also posting about it online? Update 1. It's been a few days since my last post. I read the comments today and I guess you guys are right. I don't have anything to feel sorry about. Her friends were just doing what most friends do, trying to be there for her, and being there for her always meant putting me down and making me feel bad about myself. So I'd say they did a pretty good job of it. I did feel horrible about everything for a while, but then I spoke about it to my mother and my stepdad, most importantly. And both of them said that this wasn't my fault, this was her acting crazy and now having to face the consequences for it. They advised me not to pay any mind to what her friends were saying, which was difficult for me because these were the people that I went to school with and now all of them had turned against me. But there's nothing that I can do about it because clearly they have picked which side they want to be on, and it's not mine. So instead of fighting it and trying to justify myself to everybody, I should just know that I did nothing wrong and go on with my life. Even a couple of people here were accusing me of being their favorite and talking about how my parents had failed Amanda. Let me be clear, I did not give you guys a one-sided story, and I made sure to include even the things that I'd said. The time where I refused to share my funds with her, which is why she couldn't get married since my mother also refused to contribute. That was selfish of me, but to be fair, she'd never tried to be my friend and had always been horrible to me while we were growing up, so I didn't see any reason for me to be nice to her. There were a couple of times when even I would retaliate and be mean to her or make rude comments about her. And our parents would scold both of us for doing that to each other. If I was their favorite child, then they wouldn't have said anything to me. And if we're just talking about the wedding, then I already explained how I got the money for it and why she didn't get the same treatment. She didn't bother to think about our parents and wanted a larger-than-life wedding for herself without spending anything from her own pockets. She should count herself lucky that our parents can afford to support her financially, even now. And her father has always tried to be there for her. She is a working woman, but unfortunately, she doesn't take her job seriously, which is why she's been stuck in the same position for a couple of years now. But her lifestyle is such that she can't cope with that sort of income. Neither is she willing to live modestly, and nor is she willing to work hard, so she ends up borrowing money from our parents almost every other month. They're already doing so much for her, and yet, she wanted them to spend extra money on her for her stupidly extravagant wedding last year. And when they didn't, for very legitimate reasons, she got upset and started acting like she was the victim here, which just shows that she has absolutely no gratitude in her heart. Despite all of this, my stepdad is still trying to bail her out and make sure that she's alright, while her friends are acting as if they treated her unfairly. I have worked hard for myself to be an independent woman and go ahead in my career. I studied hard throughout school and then college, and I'm doing the same hard work even now at my workplace. And that is why I don't need to rely on my parents for money. It's not my fault if she didn't try to create the same life for herself, despite having the same resources and the same support. So I really don't understand why people think that I'm the golden child when I'm not. I've worked hard for everything that I have, and I'm not going to let people invalidate that by accusing my parents of favoritism. At the end of the day, I know what I did and I know who my parents are as people. Even while her friends are accusing the left and right of being biased and playing favorites, my stepdad is still only bothered about Amanda and her well-being. And that speaks volumes about who's right and who's wrong. It's disappointing to me that even after our parents have done so much for her, she can't see that and only wants to be the victim and beg for sympathy from everyone. It's honestly just so sickening. Update 2. So the child's mother and my stepdad were able to come to a settlement, and she has agreed to drop all the charges in exchange for almost $25,000. It's a lot, but I guess to everybody, their child is worth it, and my stepdad's no exception to the rule. He offered to pay her in installments, but she wanted it all up front, and it was quite a hassle for my stepdad, but he managed to get it done somehow. And Amanda is now a free woman. Unfortunately, free doesn't translate to being grateful to our parents, and she still has an attitude. My mother told me that she hadn't reached out to them to even thank him yet, and she was furious while she was talking to me about it. It's been a couple of days and Amanda knows exactly what happened, yet she hasn't even tried to thank them. I knew she was a disgusting human being, but this is just too low, even by her standards. My mother said that my stepdad is trying his best to hide his feelings about it and hasn't said a word, but she knows that he's hurting deep down. My husband and I are supposed to leave for our honeymoon in 2 days, but we've decided that we're going to pay my family one last visit before we take off for the next couple of weeks to make sure that my stepdad's alright. He is a good man and he deserves a better daughter than Amanda, which is why I exist, and I'm going to check up on him and make sure that he's okay. At least on the bright side, Amanda's friends have stopped whining about how her parents never stood up for her and always preferred me, now that it's all over. All of them knew that they were lying, but that didn't stop them, and I just really wish that I'd said something to them, but now all the posts are gone, so it's too late for me to say anything. But I know that this is not over yet, because Amanda is definitely going to have something to say eventually, and when she does, her friends will start rallying for her again. And then I will not keep my mouth shut like I did this time. I wouldn't have stayed quiet this time either, but I just got married and I wanted to enjoy that honeymoon phase for a while. It also didn't feel right to pick on her while she was at such a low point. Also, my parents were worried sick about her. So there were a couple of reasons that I didn't say anything or indulge in the drama this time. But if she says anything out of line about me ever again, then I'm definitely going to put her in her place, and I'm sure my parents will not have any problems with that either after this. Update 3. Hey, so it's been almost a month and my husband and I just returned from our honeymoon. We came back home a couple of days ago, and boy, has it been a roller coaster ride of emotions already. To start with, Amanda is no longer a part of our family. She told everybody that she had severed all ties with us through a public announcement on social media, which I didn't see and was not told about because I was on my honeymoon and I wasn't really checking social media or people's texts, unless it was important, which this decidedly was not. So I didn't find out about that until recently. It was a relief for me, honestly. My stepdad was kind of bummed out about it, but eventually, he got over it, which is what my mother told me. Amanda had visited them a couple of days after I left for my honeymoon, but it wasn't to thank them like they'd been expecting. Instead, she actually had the guts to ask them to cut me off or she would stop talking to them. She gave them an ultimatum and said that they had to choose between me and her. Because she was apparently sick of me taking away everything from her that she deserved. I think I touched upon that in my first update, and the people who've been following the story would know that she's just making up excuses and it's all just a load of baloney. I haven't taken away anything from her, she just doesn't have anything of her own to begin with. Not even a brain. And thinks that she can just get away with it by accusing me and blaming me for all her failures, even if it has nothing to do with me. But our parents weren't going to tolerate that and told her that if it came down to that choice, then they would pick me because Amanda was ridiculously entitled, spoiled, and selfish, and they could not put up with her anymore. My mother didn't say much to her because she felt like if she tried to talk to Amanda then her head would explode out of sheer frustration. So she said to her that she was ungrateful and she had no interest in entertaining her nonsensical behavior anymore. And Amanda told her that since she wasn't her actual mother, she didn't care about what my mom had to say to her, and then turned to her father and started speaking to him instead. My mother obviously felt very insulted, so she left the room and only came back out when she heard yelling. Once my mom came back into the living room, Amanda looked at her and shrieked at her father and told him to have a nice life with his new family, and then walked out of the house and slammed the door shut behind her. Later on, my mother found out that the reason she left the house was because my stepfather had told Amanda the same things that my mother had already said to her, and she couldn't handle the fact that her father was also choosing me now, so she walked out. If my parents didn't have a favorite back then when we were growing up, they definitely do now, and I don't even think it's my fault anymore. Because she made sure that I became their favorite by behaving so badly with them. She showed my parents that she had no respect for them and didn't even seem to love them, because if she actually loved our parents, then she wouldn't behave the way that she did. She was rude to my mom because she is not Amanda's biological mother, but there's no excuse for being so cruel to your own biological father, which is what she was. She used him to support herself financially for ages, and now that she thinks she has a couple of friends who will look out for her, she thinks she can abandon her dad and go off on her own. I honestly wish her the best, as long as she stays away from our family and doesn't bother us ever again. Because she truly is the worst, and I, for one, am glad to be rid of her.